All right, yes, thank you so much. Now we're going to start with, we're going to go to pregnancy. You know, we just finished the female reproductive system. You know, there's the 3 stages in prenatal development, right? So you first need formation of the germ layers. There's 3 of them. The endoderm, which gives rise to certain structures, the ectoderm, which gives rise to certain structures, nervous system, and so forth, and skin, and then the mesoderm, which is the middle, which gives rise to muscle and skeletal system, and so forth. So those germ layers form, and we'll talk about gastrulation, which is a form, stage during which that happens, right? And then the organ systems will start to form. The respiratory system, the digestive system, the nervous system, and all those systems. Then after they've all been formed, actually when the human is still like a miniature, about a month old, and it's about an inch, you get all those organs are there, you know. And then they grow towards the end. They have growth and maturation towards the end. Okay, so those are the 3 stages. It's ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm. Okay, and I'll show you later on. I could see you squinting there trying to look at my neat handwriting. So, from fertilization to about end of the 8th week, that's the embryo stage. And I think your module was asking you a little bit about the stages and when they start and what they're called. So the first stage, okay, from fertilization, when you form the zygote, okay, until the end of the 8th week, it's called the embryo. Okay? Then, from later on, from about the 9th week all the way to the 38th week, 40 weeks, successful pregnancies, 38 weeks or more than 38 weeks is good. All right? It's called the fetus. Okay? All that time, it's called the fetus. All right? And so those are the 2 stages, really. Embryo stage and then fetus, which is the bulk of the period. So remember we talked about how the egg starts to develop from day 1. When the egg menstrual flow is happening, the egg is already starting to develop, and then you get those primordial follicles, primary follicle developing, right, all the way until day 14, when it's ovulated. Okay, so the clinical age includes all that time when the egg starts to develop, right? Okay, but usually the gestation period we measure is less the first 14 days, because we start measuring when ovulation occurs. So the clinical age is, you know, 14 days less. Okay, because the clinical age starts from the beginning. Okay, you see how the 14-day difference occurs, because, you know, ovulation occurs right at 14 days. So post-ovulatory age discounts those 2 weeks that the egg has been developing. So that's what that's talking about. So clinical age includes everything from day 1. So fertilization, like we talked about, I said, you know, sperms can last about 5 days in the, you know, female reproductive tract. But if you want to really be certain, it's up to 72 hours, really. You know, then you can be sure that definitely the sperm will survive. Okay, but after ovulation, it's only viable for 24 hours. Okay, so if you're trying to get pregnant, you must have sex about 3 or so days before you know, your female boss or your wife or whatever you call it, the female part of the relationship, when they go to you know, their cycle. So you know about the 14th day, so you subtract 3 days from that, you have sex, you're most likely to get pregnant. And then, or at least 1 day after ovulation. Okay? Usually that time, the female becomes more sexually active, or their libido goes up. Because, I mean, it's like a survival kind of instinct to increase estrogen. Yeah. So that's when she becomes, and she starts to glow too because of the estrogen that's being produced. A lot of it makes the skin look nice, which is what estrogen does.
She's nicer.
Yeah, she's nicer and more attractive at that time when she's ovulating, and she's more. I don't want to use the H word, but she's more, you know. But anyway, you know what I'm saying. So the sperm cell must therefore pass through. Remember the corona radiata? It's those cells that are surrounding the egg cell, the oocyte. and then the zona pellucida is that layer. So gotta digest through those. So you need about several hundred sperm cells to go through all that. So the corona radiata, the zona pellucida, and then the oocyte plasma membrane. So those are the three things the sperm cell has to go through. Okay, so gotta know that what's happening during fertilization and what the structures that have to be broken down. Sometimes I might say, okay, what are the three structures that the sperm cell has to break through to get to the egg? Then you talk about the corona radiata, you talk about the zona pellucida, and then you talk about the plasma membrane of the egg cell. Okay, so once fertilization occurs, once the sperm cell reaches the plasma membrane, there are changes that are going to occur to the zona pellucida, that layer surrounding the plasma membrane. Okay, it's going to start to denature the glycoproteins in that layer. Okay, and then it's going to cause the zona pellucida to separate, from the plasma membrane. So this is the egg cell, and then the zona pellucida will create a space between the plasma membrane and that. And then that's sometimes called hardening of the zona pellucida, okay? Because the membrane will start to depolarize, okay? Once sperm cell enters. Once it reaches the plasma membrane, then the zona pellucida will be, the oocyte will release those chemicals that will break off the glycoproteins in the zona pellucida, and then will cause it to start to harden and separate from the oocyte. So there's a space. So no other sperm cell can get in. Okay? So the fusion of the male pronuclei and the female pronuclei produces a diploid nucleus. When the eggs, the female, the cell, the head of the sperm cell gets into the egg, what happens is that, I'll talk about it in a little bit, it will set up camp inside the egg, and then it will unwrap, and then it expands, the head of it expands, so that, the genetic material unfolds. Then it forms the male pronucleus. And other things will be happening too with the female egg. Okay? Remember, we said it is the fertilization that stimulates the finishing of meiosis too. Okay? So the female nucleus will go to one side and finish its thing. You know what I'm saying? And then the male head nucleus will go to one side before they come together, and it will do its thing. It will unpack and so forth, and it expands. All right? Before they fuse. Okay? So this is the deal. If I talk about fertilization, if I ask about fertilization, first of all, you're going to need several hundred sperm cells to go through the whole thing. Remember, there's a bunch of cells surrounding the oocyte. So you need a few hundred, 300-400 cells. That's why if your sperm cell is low, because of loss during sex, and then by the time a few get up, and then by the time you need you need a lot of sperm cells to do all these things. Okay, so it's not a surprise that you need millions, 400 million per million, and so forth. Okay, so many sperm cells are required to digest through those layers, because you've got the corona radiators, like the zona pellucida, and then you've got the plasma membrane. All right, so once one sperm cell attaches to the zona pellucida, okay, we start to get changes now. Okay, you see, the zona pellucida is intact, very close to the plasma membrane, and here, then there's this white space between the zona pellucida. That's when it's called hardening sometimes, but literally what you're doing is you're denaturing the glycoproteins in the zona pellucida, and then it starts to expand. When it expands, it will separate from the plasma membrane of the oocyte, and that will prevent any other sperm cell from entering, because you only need the one. Right? So that's the third step. The fourth step, okay, is that once that happens, then the female nucleus goes to one side, okay, and then it will finish off, because again it's arrested in metaphase 2, right? So then it will go to one side, to one corner, and it will finish off the second meiotic division. so that it's now a true haploid cell, and it produces the second polar body. Okay, see these polar bodies, remember all the goodies go to one egg, and the other one is just a polar body. Okay, and then while the egg cell is doing that, the nucleus egg cell is doing that, the male, the head of the penis, for crying out loud, the head of the sperm cell, okay, goes to one side of the egg, and then it starts to unwrap. And you know, when you arrive somewhere, you take your bags and you start unpacking, you put them in the drawers. So that's what the male does. It will start to open up, all the genetic material will start to expand and open up, and then it forms the male pronucleus. And once the female finishes its second meiotic division, it becomes the female pronucleus. And then when that all happens, then they come together now. You see, now we have formed the male pronucleus and the female pronucleus. Okay, so, you know, so the content of the stem cell has to match. That's like unpacking, if you will. Because the head is so small, it's tiny, and it will facilitate what? Entry into the egg. Because if you have a big cumbersome egg, it's not going to go through, you know what I'm saying? So it makes sense. So when it gets in, it unwraps and it expands. And then once that happens, it's now called the male pronucleus now. And then the female, when it completes its second meiotic division, then it's now the female pronucleus. Those are the two that unite to form the 6 steps of fertilization. If I ask about it, you talk about this. Right? 6 points. All right. Just to remember what has to happen. The male gets in, first of all, causes no other sperm cell to get in. Then it causes the egg cell to finish its meiotic division, and then it also unwraps. And then after that, you form the 2 pronuclei in 5 steps, and then boom, they join together. Fertilization. Okay. All right. So gotta know that. Okay. Sometimes talk about that and ask about that. All right. So remember, we said the first stage is the embryo stage, and it's dividing. It's dividing. You have cells. It's sort of like maybe 4 cells, 8 cells, 16 cells. It keeps going like that. They keep doubling up. And then when it's the morula, we see like a ball of cells. It's about like 12, 12, 16 cells or whatever. And then it continues to divide. So these early cells, the early cells that are divided, you can imagine, they can become any kind of tissue what you need in the body, any kind of tissue whatsoever. And those are called totipotent cells. Okay, totipotent cells can become any kind of tissue you need in the body. That's why when we do research, we like to do stem cell research. Those are the ones we need, the totipotent ones. Because the totipotent ones, they can become pretty much anything in the body. You can program it to become that. Okay, because those are the cells that are going to produce the whole human being. See what I'm saying? After a while, during the development of the embryo, as it continues, right, the cells will start to differentiate a little bit. Okay, now those cells that have differentiated a little bit cannot become all the cells that you need to form a human being. They can become a few tissues, yes, but not all. Those are pluripotent cells. Okay, so in the exam, if I ask you, okay, the difference between totipotent cells and pluripotent stem cells, you'll be able to tell me, right? Okay, because pluripotent, plural for plural, it means they can become several tissues, but they can't become all of them because they've started to differentiate a little bit. They've started to specialize. Okay, so gotta know these 2 types of cells. All right, and then of course, like I was saying, after the divisions a little bit, you form a ball of cells. It's called the morula, which continues to divide. Then it forms a blastocyst, which will have like a fluid-filled space. And then the blastocyst is what implants around day 7. All right, pregnancy. Okay, like I said, the morula is got 12 or more cells, about 3 days to 4 days. So really, the morula is about a ball of 16 cells at day 4. Okay, and this is all occurring in the uterine tubes. Okay, it's making its way towards the uterus. Right. And then the ball of cell will continue to divide, you know, and so when it's about 100 cells or so, it's now called the blastocyst from about the 5th day or so. Okay? And the blastocyst, 2 days or so later, is the one that implants. Okay? So the blastocyst is like so. It's got one cell layer, this is a cell, these are cells, right? This is the blastocyst, one cell layer. And that one cell layer that's surrounded is called the trophoblast. Okay, trophoblast, And on the inside, you'll have what's called the inner cell mass, which probably has 2 cells like that. And the inner cell mass is what becomes the embryo. Okay? And then the trophoblast is what forms the placenta, okay? Because it's one on the outside, it's the one that's going to attach to the endometrium. See what I'm saying? So the trophoblast will form the placenta. Alright? So you got the inner cell mass, okay, which becomes the cell, and usually it's the 2 layers. Okay, some of the inner cell, the ones on the inside, will become the embryo proper, and the other layer, usually this is the epiblast cells and this is the hypoblast cells. The ones on the bottom, close to the trophoblast, are the ones that will form the placenta portion of the fetus. Okay. It will form the chorion, which is the chorion is the first of the fetal membranes that forms the, kind of sort of finger-like projections that will go into and interdigitate into the endometrial lining to form the. So the endometrium is the maternal portion of the placenta, and the chorion, which is formed by those outer inner cell mass cells called epiblast cells, forms the chorion, which is the fetal component of the placenta. So the placenta is made up of the endometrium from the mom and the chorion from the fetus. Alright, so that's that. So this is what we're doing here. We're dividing and it's doubling up. About day 4, it's morula and it's about 16 cells. A day or 2 later, it's the blastocyst. It's about 100 cells. It's got 1 layer called the trophoblast on the outside, and then of course it's got this inner cell mass. You see how it's got these sort of blue, gray cells, and then the orange ones? The orange ones become the embryo proper, will become the human being that we are trying to form here. And then the other ones will become the chorion, which becomes the placenta portion of the fetus. Okay? And it attaches right close to the fundus up there. It doesn't attach here. And I'll tell you what happens if it attaches down here, okay? There's problems with that, and it's not good. That's when you start to have placenta previa and so forth. I'm sure some of you, when you went, the female studies, or the male if he was there, they would be here after the first few ultrasounds. They say, oh, you might have previa. Previa, that's what they're talking about. It is implanted way too low, and it's very close to the cervical opening. So the placenta will start to form over the cervical opening, and that's not good, right? Okay, for obvious reasons, and we'll talk about that. So implantation of the blastocyst has to occur way up on near the fundus. Okay, it begins about day 6, 7, about a week after fertilization. That's about the ballpark. All right. So like I was saying, the trophoblast layers will proliferate to form 2 distinct layers. Remember, the trophoblast is the outside layer. Okay. So the trophoblast will form the cytotrophoblast. The cyto means cell. So that's a whole cell with its plasma membrane, okay? So, and it forms the inner, and it maintains its boundaries. Then the syncytial trophoblast, those cells will lose the plasma membrane, right? Because what you're trying to do is mesh those cells with the endometrial epithelium, right? So they become one. So those cells, they lose the plasma membrane so that it meshes and grows into the endometrial lining to get the nutrients for the exchange. See what I'm saying? So those are the 2 layers. The cytotrophoblast are the main 4 cells. The syncytial trophoblast, they lose the plasma membrane for obvious reason, right? Because you're trying to form a placenta to join the 2, so you can get exchange of nutrients and whatnot. Okay? And so they'll invade the endometrium with the syncytial trophoblast. Okay? So the implanted blastocyst then, is then covered by these endometrial cells. And they grow into each other like this, the finger-like projections, which are called chorionic villi, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So implantation is completed around the 14th day. So all this time, where is the nutrients coming from? One, from the egg cell, right? Because remember, it's all big and so forth. It gets all the goodies in the cytoplasm and the organelles, plus the secretions of the uterus that are in the secretory phase. Remember, we said it's got glycoproteins, it's got glycogen and lipids and all these things, goodies for during the formation of the placenta. Then the placenta will start to take over production of all the hormones, and then the corpus luteum will then just be absorbed after that. Okay, but the placenta, that's why it produces HCG to show that you're really pregnant, because it's the only hormone that comes into play only when you're pregnant. So that's why we use it as a measurement for there's a pregnancy test. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna kind of push the limits here, so we can kind of do so. Okay, so the implant bloods is covered, and then implantation is completed after another 7 days, right? Okay, the blastocyst, like I was saying, the syncytial trophoblast, the cytotrophoblast, and the mesenchyme. Remember, mesenchyme we said is the embryonic connective tissue. It gives all the connective tissue in the fetus comes from the mesenchyme. Remember we talked about it when we did connective tissues and stuff. So the extra embryonic mesenchyme, all that forms the chorion. Okay, which is the fetus contribution to the placenta formation. Okay, so part of the placenta belongs to the fetus. Part of the placenta belongs to the mom. Right? And the mom contributes endometrium. Okay, so the chorion, that one of the extra embryonic membranes, starts to produce human chorionic gonadotropin, which will continue to stimulate the corpus luteum to produce estrogen and progesterone while the placenta is setting camp. Right? Before, when it's done, 14 days, then it starts to take over. All right?
So it keeps pregnancy until the placenta takes over.
Yeah. So that's why the female has to go, when oogenesis is occurring, we have follicular development, and we also have the oocyte division, right? Remember those two things we talked about at the beginning. Because the follicle is what becomes the corpus luteum. And it's very important at the beginning, before the placenta is set up, to produce the hormones that maintain the uterine lining and maintain the pregnancy. So the corpus luteum, which is maintained by HCG, while the placenta is setting up, forms that, okay? And so between the second and third month, the placenta, will assume the role of producing this estrogen and progesterone, and eventually the corpus luteum just gets absorbed, all right? And of course, the maternal blood and the fetal blood do not mix, okay? Because they are two different individuals. The fetus may have A positive and the mom may have something else, blood type, so they don't mix. And this is when you get the rhesus problem.
They can leak.
If it leaks, and then the mom starts to make antibodies against that rhesus positive, if she happens to be rhesus negative. Okay? If she's positive, it's okay, because then she won't form any antibodies, because she will kill herself. She won't do that. Okay, so that's that. So, and then this picture is what that forms you got the epiblast up here, which forms the amnion. Okay, that's the second of the fetal membranes. And then the yolk sac forms with the epiblast cells, the hypoblast cells on the bottom, which is the third of the embryonic membranes. So far, we get the amnion is one that surrounds it. It's a colorless membrane that surrounds it, fills with fluid. And then the yolk sac is what gives rise to some of the blood cells and things like that at the beginning. Okay, the yellow part. All right, and I think let me see here what the next is. I'll stop on the next one and then we'll go. So you see how the chorionic villi grow into the endometrial lining, so that it starts to get all those nutrients and so forth, and then the bloods don't mix. You can see the syncytial trophoblast and so forth, and the mesenchyme, which is the connective tissue on the outside that forms the placenta. Okay, so like I was saying, at the end of the day, you can see how the corpus luteum inside of the ovary is producing estrogen and progesterone, and then later on, you see, about the third month or so in the first trimester, towards the end of the first trimester, it's very less estrogen and progesterone, and the placenta is now starting to take over. And then later on in the second and third trimester, the placenta is producing all the estrogen, all the progesterone, and the ovary no more from the corpus luteum. Okay, so I'll stop here, and next time we'll pick up from here and finish. Right. Thank you, guys.